Hello and welcome to the February 8th, 2019 edition of the Gold Goats and Guns Hour here on YouTube and Periscope. Reminder for those of you on Periscope, if you want to join in on the chat, Livestreams not sending me your comments, so if you want to join in on the discussion, please pop on over to YouTube. You can find my, just look for my YouTube channel. So, all right, let's get started. Tonight I want to talk about some misconceptions about my about the position between being anti-war for certain reasons and being anti-government for all reasons. There's a small thing, as this channel starts to grow and I start to cover different topics, it's the audience is broadening out, and because of that, we got a lot of people coming into the middle of the conversation. I know for many of you who have been here for over 2 years now that I've been doing this, first on Periscope, then at times on Gabbard TV, and here now on YouTube. You've heard a lot of what I would consider my standard rants, and I've been having these talks both privately and publicly for 15, 18, 20 years now. So I have to remind myself every once in a while that I have to actually kind of go over the same real estate twice, but I'm kind of like Patton. I don't like to do that, right? I just want to move on to the next thing, and y'all can catch up to what I've already said previously, and if not, you're SOL. But that's not really a winning strategy as the audience branches out, and we have to get back to talking about some of the very basics of who I am, what I believe, and why I believe them. All right, we haven't had that discussion in quite a while. So, yes, by the way, as I revealed earlier on a YouTube video I did earlier, today is my 51st birthday. I'm not looking for anybody to I'm not looking for condolences or any or well wishes or anything. It's just a fact of the matter, and my standard reply to that, of course, is that, well, it's another safely made another trip around the sun. Who says I don't get out anymore? Come on. I make it all the way around the solar system pretty much once a year, just like everybody else. So, it is a day like everything else. So, I guess condolences to my mom for having, I don't know. Consider my relationship with my mother, I'm not sure who made out better there or worse, but so yeah, let's talk about those things, because as I talk about different topics, I'm going to come into contact. And when I use the word socialism, I don't use it the same way that most conservatives do. I don't use it the way most quote unquote right wing commentators do. I use it very, very specifically. And it was a beautiful day here in Central Florida, James. I agree. How was I supposed to handle work on a day like today, in the immortal words of Ferris Bueller? But yeah, I did wind up working literally all day. So when I use the word socialism, I use it as a catch-all phrase for collectivism. I am an individualist at the fundamental core of my being. I believe that there is no higher ideal than the celebration and the defense of an individual's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and really life, liberty, and property, which are all extensions of your right to life. And if you don't believe in the right of an individual to live as he sees fit, then at some level you're a collectivist. And I mean this very sincerely. I'm not being reductionist for the sake of being pedantic. I'm not being reductionist for the sake of being of making things easy. It is truly the dividing line and the true great question of the age. Where do the rights of the individual begin and end, and where do the rights of the community start? And I take the argument that you cannot, in the position which grows out of the non-aggression principle, which grows out of very basic property rights arguments and many other things, which is that it is through the ruthless, and I mean ruthless, application and defense of individual rights to life, liberty, and property that society grows. And that anything that abridges that at a coercive level, I'm not talking about at a voluntary level. We choose to limit our behavior in order to exist within a framework of a society and a family and a culture and all those things. But it's all voluntary. We make the choice of the cost of acting like a jackass are higher than the cost of acting like an honorable person. We ultimately make that choice. No one else makes it for us. Until somebody points a gun at your head and says, do this or else. And even at that point, you always still have the right and reserve the right to say no. You always have the right to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Shoot me. Go ahead. Shoot me. Try not paying your taxes. There's always a gun there. When we talk about socialism, we talk about where's the gun. When we talk about collectivism, it's always about where's the gun. Because the community does derive from the application of the individual's ability to pursue his own means to the point of not aggressing another person. I don't have the right to, if I have the right to live my own life, then I conversely have to respect your right to live your life. And the limit is where we come into contact with each other is when we come into conflict over something. And that's where property comes into the discussion, because property and the defining of who has antecedent property rights is what should ultimately determine who gets to win the fight over those resources without bloodshed. And so that if the person who doesn't have antecedent property rights to that thing can then persuade the other person to give up ownership of that thing that he has antecedent property rights in through a negotiation. Because negotiated settlements are the way of the world, as opposed to coercive ones. Now, you can beat somebody over the head, and then take that thing, and then at that point, the person hasn't ceded his antecedent property rights to the thing you stole from him. It's just practically he's not going to be able to get it back. So it's a very odd thing. Libertarians are functionally, by definition, anti-war. We are functionally, by definition, anti all forms of coercive behavior. Now, socialism at its fundamental core is centralized planning of the means of production, which means some form of centralized collective ownership of the means of production of a society. That's what it means. It implies the abrogation of individual property rights, because the means of production, whatever Marx meant by that phrase, means of production. Well, what is the means of production? It's ultimately people, because nothing is produced in this world without there first having been a person to think it up and then bring it into being. And the ultimate argument by the collectivists is that because you live in a societal structure, you didn't build that on your own. You're right, I didn't build it on my own. As I said this afternoon in the video, you didn't. No, I didn't. Nothing I built in my life did I build on my own. Not a thing. But everything I have, I've earned through voluntary exchange. And everything I was gifted by my parents as an extension of their property right in me originally, and then in all the things that they decided to give me, or in the opportunities that they gave me, by their application of and their acquisition of their own capital, their own wealth, as meager as it was, is what gave me the head start that I could then, utilize to my end. And I can either squander or, multiply. It's up to me, nobody else. And so when I use the word socialism, I mean exactly that. I mean it as a euphemism for all forms of collectivism. And it doesn't matter what form of socialism we're talking about. Democratic socialism, which is just socialism by another name. Communism, which is just socialism by another name. Or fascism, which is just socialism by a different name. They're all just variations and flavors on this basic concept that the collective has rights over individuals, and individuals themselves are not sovereign. They are not sovereign actors. And that, of course, is patent nonsense. Because I ask the basic question all the time. Who owns you? Do you own yourself? If you don't own yourself, who does? If you can't assert a property right in yourself, you have no business using the phrase, I want this. I do this. You don't have an individual right. You don't have the ability to assert an I. If you do not believe in individual property rights, if you do not if you do not believe in the ownership concept of yourself, of your thoughts, of your person, of your actions, then you have, one, no responsibility for anything you do, and two, can't demand anything of anybody, including to be classified as a different person. You're not even a number. You're just an object without rights or privileges. That's fundamental core. This is what you're talking about when you start talking about, well, the collective has rights. No, the collective does not have rights. Individuals have rights. We decide, and the idea behind the enlightened idea behind our government here in the United States is that we, the people, as sovereign actors, grant powers, enumerated powers to our government. As rights holders, we have the ability to transfer some power to our government to do these particular things, and only these particular things, and nothing more. That's it. Governments don't have rights. Corporations don't have rights. Corporations are a function, a creation of a government that does not have rights. Government's not a rights holder. Government has power. Government is subordinate to the people who are rights holders, who imbued it with power. But we have the right to withdraw that power whenever we want. It was Lincoln who decided that we didn't, and that the Union was more important than the people who made it up. And to save the Union, he had to destroy it. Bullshit. He just destroyed it. There's no saving involved here. So ultimately, when I use that term, that doesn't make me, by the way, that makes me neither right wing or left wing. Because in my view of the universe, my view of the political spectrum, there's the left wing, which is vaguely communist, and the right wing, which is vaguely socialist. And that's the guy, and those are the ones that sit on this axis that we argue about. And then there's liberty and authority. And left authoritarianism, Hitler. Right authoritarianism, Mussolini. Or left authoritarianism, Stalin. Less Hitler than Stalin. Right authoritarianism, Mussolini. At the top, the non-aggression principle. At the bottom, Emperor Palpatine. So, and in the center, why the people who are willing to trade some ideas for some things, for some freedoms for other things at the same time. They're not really ideologically, or they're fluid. They don't really, as a collective, as a group of people, I don't say as a collective, but as a group of people in the center, yeah, we're willing to trade one for the other, and that's what politics is supposed to be. But politics is that moment, is that process by which we sell our souls to get something back from the very government that was supposed to protect our rights in the first place. So the point here, ultimately, is that when I talk about socialism, I mean that. And I mean anyone who disagrees with me about socialism and what they think socialism means. So socialism is not communitarianism. Libertarians are very communitarian when you actually reach that understanding of the non-aggression principle to the point where you understand the community comes from the voluntary interaction of of rights holders who ultimately and absolutely respect each other's rights to live peaceably, which means ultimately that we can only engage in voluntary constructive commerce with each other. And that's it. And commerce takes all forms. It takes the form of this conversation we're having, or this one-way conversation we're having right now while I watch the chat splash by. It can be going to the store and buying apples. It can be hanging out with your friends at a bowling league. It's all the same, and paying the bowling alley for rent shoes and throw 16-pound balls down a lane. Down a waxed lane, whatever, at pins, whatever. It's whatever you want to do. It's going round a golf or building an oil refinery or whatever it is. We have that's where society is built from. That's where culture comes from. Jordan Peterson makes these arguments all the time about where we figured out through thousands of years of trial and error what works and what doesn't. What builds sustainable societies and what doesn't build sustainable societies. And tyranny always, and the tyranny of the collective always ends in tears. It always ends in massive bloodshed. It always ends in ideological wars of extermination, pogroms, crystal knocks, you name it. You can put a brave face on it all you want. This time we're going to call it democratic socialism. If we haven't been practicing democratic socialism for the last 75 years, it's been the dominant political, organizational conceit of the age. Every major governing party in Europe is the Democratic Socialist Party. Europe's a shithole. They've squandered thousands of years worth of culture in less than a century, thanks to socialism. Thousands of years of culture and wars and this and that, and they're destroying it in less than a century. Trading drywall work for an oil change. Absolutely. I'm just kind of reading through some of the comments at this point. Ideological wars of ideology. You're right. Socialism always tends that way. It also is incapable of coordinating the actions of millions of people. Only the free market can do that. Because only with a rational pricing system, and only with the drive for profit, which is nothing more than people expressing their comparative advantage. I'm better at words than you are at some other thing. So you trade some of your life to listen to me wordsmith the ideas that you want to hear, right? Mine's a very esoteric version in the place of the division of labor. But it used to be something as simple as you have your groundwater that you want tested for heavy metals. You bring them to my laboratory and I will test them and tell you whether or not your groundwater is contaminated. I used to do that work. I considered it noble work. I didn't get paid very well for it, but whatever. It was work, and it was a very simple thing. I used to cut people's lawns for a living. I used to take out garbage for a living. I used to shovel shit, literally shovel shit for $3 an hour. I'm not saying that's noble work either. It's just work. You trade that, and I had a comparative advantage in shoveling shit. I was strong and I was young. I had a comparative advantage over half the men I worked with. They were old and alcoholic. But take the classic hypothetical situation of a first order economy. I'm better at growing corn than you are. I'm better at growing corn than you are, and you're better at tanning hides and turning them into shoes than I am. So hey, how about I trade my corn for your shoes at some rate, and we both profit from it? Why? Because I am good at growing corn, and I can take less time to grow that corn, the same amount of corn that you can. This way, I grow corn, you make shoes, and we're both better off. because we both freed up hours of our day to go and pursue other means. Some of them profitable, some of them consumptive, some of them just simply consumptive. I'm just going to go home and, drink a bottle of whiskey, or I could go out and make another pair of shoes to sell to somebody else, or, whatever. I mean, that's what profit is. Profit is just the relative amount of time you get back by trading with somebody who's better at something than you are. And profit is the means by which we measure that. That's all it is. It's not exploitative. Marx was wrong about that. Marx was also wrong about the labor theory of value. That's why it's still a theory after 170 years. Okay? And I urge socialists who think that they've unlocked something new here, democratic socialism, to go and read Mises's Socialism. It's a very long book, but really only about the first 150 pages are all you need to read. After that, he just repeats ad nauseum, no, this is why socialism doesn't fucking work. Because Mises was nothing if not a completist and sometimes pedantic. But he wanted to make sure everybody got the point. And that intellectual honesty means you go through every potential case study and see if the hypothesis still works. And he was right. No one's challenged this in 100 years. Why? Because he was right then and it's right now. It's the time problem. I barely understand. I barely have enough knowledge of my own life to construct a model of what it is that I need on a daily basis to live my life constructively. I'm not particularly good at living my life. Just like the rest of us aren't particularly good at living our lives. So what makes any of us think that some philosopher fucking king sitting in Washington, D.C. has any better fucking plan about how to run this economy and how many shoes to have made and how much oil to refine and how many cars to produce than you do? Because that's the central failing of all forms of socialism, all forms of collectivism. It doesn't matter if you democratize the process. All you do then is get idiocracy. Everybody squabbling amongst themselves to try and figure out what it is that they need. And the truth of the matter is, you're just better off trading amongst each other and let the miracle of coordinated exchange and the controlled chaos of everybody pursuing their own ends, creating a beautiful dance of capital moving efficiently through an economy, and everybody getting what they want. Now, do people have buyer's remorse over the things they bought in your life? Of course. Chalk it up to a learning experience. What you thought was a profitable trade turns out to be an unprofitable trade. I mean, when you're trading stocks, it's really easy. There are numbers there. And if you bought it at $45 a share and you sold it for $35, you lost $10 a share. And if you did the converse and bought it at $35 and sold it at $45, you made $10 a share. But it's all about time. And it's all about knowledge. And then applying specific knowledge to a particular period of time. And that process loss is the fundamental failing conceit of all socialist impulses. Period. That's it. Everything else grows from that, and all you can do is multiply the errors. Doesn't matter if we're talking about the amount of money that should be in an economy. Doesn't matter if it's the amount of oil we should produce or anything else. That's the fundamental failing of all central planning. There is no way around this. Okay? This is like the Gibbs free energy equation. This is like the second law of thermodynamics. Okay? You know what the three laws of thermodynamics are, roughly put, are you can't win. That's the first law. You can't win. Second law is you can't even break even. And the third is you're not allowed to leave the game. Okay? That's life. It's not fair. It is what it is. Everything tends towards chaos and we're all going to die eventually. And the universe is eventually going to collapse in on itself. But in that time, we can utilize our time with each other to create the best version of that world for our brief period of time in the continuum of the universe to make as best a world for ourselves and for our progeny as we can. And everything else is just bullshit. And everything else is just someone selling you something so that they don't have to fucking work and you do. Because that's what it comes down to. ultimately. And anybody who tries to sell you on that stuff is just lying to you and themselves, especially all the newly minted democratic socialists that have sprung up in the last 10 years, some of whom are my friends, who I thought I had converted to libertarianism, and then they became democratic socialists because they listened to Bernie talk for 20 minutes and, you know, they got all weepy. It's fucking retarded, but it is what it is. All right, let's open it up for questions. I'm going to go back through and read some of the comments just so we have an idea. Marinated with corporatism. Mike Bernard, are we permitted to not initiate the use of force, but to use if attacked? Yes. I'll get into libertarian justice theory in just a second. Let me read part B of your question. Does this begin with at the individual level or extend to a standing army's role in defending the country? Well, countries are one of those things that, by definition, a geographic unit created by a government, which is itself the use of force. So that already breaks the NAP in the first place. Are we talking what kind of government are we talking about here? State, local, county, your homeowners association, you? The question is, are you allowed? Well, that's a good question. Under the NAP, no. Practically, as opposed to philosophically, well, of course, you're going to band together with like-minded people in order to try and defend each other from, you know, the ravening hordes, right? With the ruthless enforcement of property rights, what we don't have at that point, and contract law and all, and contract and law and all of these things that have to build out of these things. And we're nowhere close to any of this stuff. So when we start talking about this in the theoretic, we start talking about this stuff in the philosophical, we're talking about the philosophical perspective here. We're not talking about the grasp, the on the ground practicalities of today. I'm talking about this at the fundamental level of how should we view our problems? Through what lens should we view our problems in order to effect solutions? There's specification, what's the fucking problem? And then there's implementation, what to do about it. Now, the implementation is always going to be, at some level, imperfect, especially if you're dealing with imperfect people, right? But we should not be looking at a problem that exists today that we can look at and go, that's a government-created problem. So more government's not going to get us out of that problem. Less government is. We're going to get rid of the market imbalance that the government intervention created in the first place, which should open up that capital and should get rid of that problem over time. I could pick any number of things, but I don't really want to do that at this point. So are you permitted? Of course you're permitted to defend yourself. Of course, self-defense is a fundamental right. You have a right to continue to defend yourself against aggression. But to what degree? Well, Rothbard would argue absolutely to nothing more than a proportional degree. So if somebody hurls words at you, you don't have the right to punch them. You have the right to hurl words back at them. If somebody hurls their fist at you, you have the right to block them and punch them back. Now, countries should always pursue as humble a foreign policy or as humble an interactive policy with other people as possible. Problems, of course, is that countries in control of their currencies, governments being fundamentally inefficient, and socialist, and an expression, and all forms of collective government are forms of socialism, because the government taxes, appropriates a certain portion of the means of production, our labor, aggregates it under a big fucking pool, and then allocates that money in some way that is fundamentally immoral because it was stolen from people via taxation in the first place. So all these problems we already have all these examples of aggression, which then necessitate at some point the government to say, well, we need to print more money. We're running a deficit. So print more money. And that's now a stealth tax. And inflation is nothing more than thievery through buying tomorrow's goods at using tomorrow's money at yesterday's prices to steal the VIG in between, which is what they're doing. Because again, prices are information. They transmit themselves throughout an economy. If the Fed prints money today, hands it to the Treasury, and no one knows that the Fed printed that, say, $500 million, and then the Treasury goes and spends that $500 million, what are they doing? The first time they spend the money, it's at today's prices. When the people they spent that money with get the signal that there's more demand for their product, they raise their price because there's still the same amount of supply. So the law of supply and demand takes over, the prices wind up rising. That's what inflation is. When the government prints money to do it. Now, when the government does that, that's going to create other problems with people with their own currency on the other side of an arbitrary political border. And what's that going to do? It's going to change the exchange rate between one currency and the other. And it's going to make one country's goods seem cheaper to the other country A's goods, who inflated, seem cheaper to the people who live in country B. So they're going to spend their money by coming across the border and buying, cheap whiskey and cheap gasoline, and then go back across the arbitrary political border, rationally saving the VIG. Shock. The difference, the VIG. Shock. That's a form of aggression. So what's country B do? Tells country A to stop inflating. Or they inflate themselves, thereby stealing from their own people. Or they go to war. All right. Yeah, I'm with James. I'm all about the non-aggression principle until you look twice at my family. Then heaven help you, I may just buy. I this is the problem. People aren't rational. It takes a strong man to know when to fight and when to just let it roll off his ass. It takes greater strength to have weapons and not use them and know when to use them than to just acquire weapons and then use them willy-nilly. This is why Donald Trump is a fundamentally weak person. He uses every weapon at his disposal to go after the people who he feels are his inferior and he feels are bad. It's ridiculous. Okay. So a good definition of socialism today: you vote your way in and shoot your way out. That's very good. I like that. All right, let's go forward a little bit. Focus Farm Arabians. I'm 71 and still shoveling shit. I love this comment. For horses, so I'm good. Almost impossible to find young people want to do this work even for $12.50 an hour. I know. Great comment, by the way. I have goats and I shovel goat shit and I throw it into my raised beds and we grow sweet potatoes in them every year. I get weepy after a few beers. Bernie makes it worse. Good evening, Mark Bogosian. How are you? Tom, Ocasio-Cortez carbon tax. Don't let that happen. Getting taxed to hell by it right now. Food gets taxed repeatedly between field and table, taxing home heat, and it's minus 20 degrees here. Save yourself. Oh, I know. Oh, she's not going anywhere, that one. Mike Bernard. Well, Tom, thank you. I'm glad you liked the definition. Thank you. I had missed the bigger picture that the government itself is a violation of the NAP. Exactly, it is. By definition, it has to be. Government doesn't own anything that it didn't steal from somebody else in the first place. But you can't argue with that. You can't argue with it. You just make your peace with it. There's some people who just made their peace with it, and that's fine. I make my peace with it. I don't want to get shot. I pay my taxes. I don't go into the convenience store, buy a candy bar, and say I'm not paying my sales tax because it's immoral. I'm a fucking idiot. Guess what? The poor 16-year-old girl, 18-year-old girl behind the counter, she don't give a shit. She's like, fine, you don't get your fucking candy bar then. It's a simple-minded view of inflation. No, it's actually not, Steve Hudson. There's plenty of collusion, and the law of supply and demand is just a tendency. No, absolutely not. The law of supply and demand, it exists. There is plenty of collusion. Of course it is. We live in a corporatocracy, for Christ's sake. And there is collusion. But cartel-style collusion doesn't last very long. In any self-regulating marketplace, there's always an arbitrage opportunity that comes in for the collusionists to get together and try and set price above the market. Somebody's always going to come in and undercut them. This is why OPEC has always been a metastable system. It's why, in some ways, Trump is right to try and push and break up OPEC by goosing and by encouraging domestic energy production. He's doing it for the wrong reasons, mind you, and he's in some ways doing it the wrong way, i.e., fracking at low interest rates. But whatever, that's we can get into the weeds of that in a different discussion. But fundamentally, inflation is the printing of more money. It is. We have changed that definition in the last 20 years to suit the central bankers to rise in prices. North on 60, it takes greater strength, wisdom, and morality to have big weapons and refrain from using them even after having been repeatedly punched in the mouth. That last little bit was my part. That's Putin, not Trump. Government is not an agreement. It is not an agreement. I was born into this and I don't like it and I have no way out of it. I did not give that right up. I did not give that right up. Government is not an agreement. It's not a contract that any contract lawyer would ever be able to argue in a court of law. If it was a private contract, no way. Would never work. Oh, you're bound by a contract that your parents signed. We did away with debtors' prisons, generational debt a long time ago, because the sins of the father don't translate to the son. So by the same token, the sins of the father who signed the government contract then puts me into chattel slavery to my fucking government? No, I don't think so. And I sincerely believe that's the way it works. And I'm not a subject of my government, even though I am, because they have guns and they point them at me. Intellectually, I'm not a subject of them. I know exactly who they are and what they do, and I know exactly what they're willing to do to me if I say no long enough. I know exactly what they're willing to do to me if I keep talking about these things in this way and become more successful than I have been at convincing you that I'm right. What do you think would happen to me? They've shot men for less. The government printing money is how the 1% gets richer. They get the money first. Exactly. This is one among Mises's many contributions to the dismal science of economics was to explain the transmission of money. The asymmetrical movement of new money is the problem. Rothbard always used to make this argument all the time. He's like, look, if they printed a bunch of money and they handed out all the new money equally to everybody, everything would norm out to zero. Prices would all rise. If they printed 10% more money and handed everybody 10% more money, prices wouldn't rise. Or prices would rise by 10%. And no one would really gain much of an advantage over anybody else. Because everybody would go, wow, there's 10% more money. I'm raising my prices by 10%, like immediately. That's what would happen. Except for the people who have inventory overall. But generally speaking, money is the commodity, the creation of which confers no net benefit. That's another one of Mises's great contributions to the intellectual library of economic thought. But the other one is that, so you have the symmetrical creation of new money units, which raises prices symmetrically. And then you have the asymmetrical one. That's what I described earlier. The Federal Reserve, the Treasury, the Treasury says to the Federal Reserve, print some money, sell some bills and some notes and some bonds into the marketplace, and then take the proceeds and give them to us so we can spend them. And then they spend them first, and then they told two friends, and then they told two friends, and slowly over the course of 4 or 5 or 6 iterations or more probably, eventually the prices will all rise. Not all the prices, because the money will filter through the economy unevenly based on, one, where it was spent originally. That's first. And then 2, where it goes from there. and then how it propagates out from there. So the government picks winners and losers when it does that. It says this industry is going to get an extra $200 million this year. This industry is going to get an extra $5 billion. They're going to win relative to them. 90% of investing in this world today is really just picking where the government's putting all its fucking money, because there's no friggin' profit no net profit in the things that they're investing in. When you strip out all the inflation, when you strip out all of the bullshit and the heuristic normalization of all the economic data and everything else, real growth, GDP growth in this country has been trending under 1% for over a decade. And God knows, and relative to wages, I was reading Stockman's new book. I got to the section on real GDP growth versus wage growth, and it's obscene. It's everything the left is complaining about. And they're right to complain about it. Absolutely correct to complain about it. That all the money went to Wall Street and all the money went to government contractors, and none of it went to the productive part of the economy. Wages haven't grown. Real wealth hasn't grown. We're all getting hollowed out. Bernie was right about that. He's wrong about the solution. The solution isn't more of this shit. It's less of it. It's leave the money in the hands of the people who are going to use it to their own ends and create sustainable wealth based on the things that they want and need, not based on what the needs of the politicians and the central planners and the bankers and everybody else wants. Reframe the argument about wants and needs and not about corruption, and then think about what happens. Reframe it from that perspective, and you'll see why the argument for leaving it in the hands of the people is better. Even if we're flawed, even if we do stupid shit with it, it's still better than what the government does. The government spends $7,000 on a fucking toilet. The dumbest person in Lowe's would not spend $7,000 on a toilet. Wasn't the New Deal good? No, the New Deal was terrible. The New Deal was terrible. Do you know what FDR had to do aside from threaten to pack the court? Because the Supreme Court knew the New Deal was unconstitutional. FDR twisted judges' arms, threatened to pack the court with 17 people or 15 people or whatever the hell it was, and put all of his judges on it in order to get all this stuff done. He created farm subsidies and all of these other things that we're still living with today. Rural electrification stuff. These laws are still on the books. These are not market-driven things. It ushered in the government control over communications, roadways at a national level, telecommunications, roadways, travel, water, all of it. It nationalized so much of this stuff. Crazy. Abrogated property rights left and right. The Fed is terrified of inflation that mirrors out of 1978. I'm assuming that's 1978 is what you mean, Stoyanovich. At $21 trillion, it would bankrupt the country in 2 days. The Fed knows that they can't raise interest rates too far because the government can't afford to pay the interest on the debt. Because a lot of our debt is variable rate, by the way. It's not fixed rate, it's variable rate. I mean, you raise the price of you raise interest rates, and the amount of money that Congress spends on servicing the debt goes up. And even on the fixed rate stuff, they still have to issue new debt every year, and they're going to be issuing it at higher and higher rates, which means that over time, it's all going to balloon. I mean, one of the first things that Greenspan did was one of the smartest things he ever did was to pay off in full all of the debt that was issued when Volcker ran the prime rate up to 21%, and we were selling T-bills. We were selling 30-year bonds at 13%. I said to my dad, Dad, I didn't know a fucking thing. This is 1981. I'm like, Dad, 1981. I'm 13 years old. I'm like, Dad, they're paying you 13%. Go buy some 30-year bonds. He didn't. Eventually, they paid them all off like 4 years later in full. With all the future accrued interest. And they paid the fucking things off. Then, I mean, with some portion of the accrued interest paid off. They got rid of the damn things. The minute they were able to get interest rates down to 6-7%, rolled those out and reissued the debt at lower interest rates. Ryu Shake saying, you are right. The stupidest person in the world will only spend $6,999 on a toilet. Not like the government that will spend $7,000. All right, come on. It's weird that Occasional Cortex, I do like that name for her, by the way, would call it the Green New Deal because it's the socialist playbook from FDR. It means a depression down the road. And she's not even talking about raising taxes to pay for it. I mean, she is kind of, but she knows that she just wants to print money. She just literally say, well, why don't we just print all the money? Because, we owe it to ourselves, right? Isn't the USA effectively bankrupt? All governments are bankrupt. The US is just a lot bankrupt. I mean, all of these governments are bankrupt. All the banks are overdrawn. We just don't call it in. I mean, you talk to me seriously, and I'm 100. I don't believe in fractional reserve banking. I don't talk about these things often anymore. We're usually talking about geostrategic, tactics and geopolitical tactics and all this other stuff that goes on for the day. But let's get back down to brass tacks. I believe in 100% reserve banking. I believe in a monetary system based on a money that it has no counterparty risk, be it gold or Bitcoin. I don't give a fuck. Just give me one of them. You can issue dollars that are tied to gold. That's fine. If you need to move paper or electronic stuff around, that's fine. But at some point, the gold should be allocated and the rights of the countries that own the gold. And I don't even really believe the government should be issuing money. I think that's a terrible idea. But whatever. It's the world we live in. It's the world I got. So let's at least make the money that they issue tied to something that has no counterparty debt, and we'll put a rein on their impulse to spend to buy votes, because that's what they do. Is Wells Fargo broke? I haven't looked at Wells' balance sheet, but I mean, by definition, all banks that are fractionally reserved or fractionally lent long, they're all effectively bankrupt. They're all with George Bailey, just waiting to happen. Not just Bush, 100% drunk. So essentially, Bush put you in debt and gave all the cash to Blackwater and his mate's company. It's not that. It's not that simple. It's a process. Some of it went to ourselves, and some of it went to other people. And because we have the world's reserve currency and the dominant trade currency in the world, there's a huge appetite for our dollar that we can export debt overseas and get goods in return. We have the best deal in the world. It's a terrible deal. It's a terrible deal for the world. It's a terrible deal for humanity, but it's the best deal in the world for Americans. Ready? We issue debt that's based on nothing. We just made it up out of thin air. And then we sell it and we buy goods with it. Donald Trump doesn't understand that $600 billion trade deficit that we have, kind of necessary if you're going to liquefy the capital markets. If she actually quoted the whole idea about cow flatulence contributing to global warming to a bill submitted to Congress, and she's dumber than she looks, and she has no filter. Fly me to the moon, and let me sail among the stars. Oh God, don't get me started. I love that song. Wants to ban all air travel, rebuild all the buildings. She's cute in a kind of the U.S.'s best export is inflation. Not best, but it's among the most valuable. It really is. We export inflation. That's what we do. And the rest of the world takes it because they don't have any choice. Less because they're all tied to the same rotten system. And no one is willing to call the bluff at this point. But they will at some point. They're beginning to now. They're beginning to de-dollarize their trade. Some countries are. Other countries are looking to. But right now, the world right now is still tied to the dollar and the euro as the two dominant trade currencies at this point. I get the RMB I get the Swift RMB tracker every month, which charts the growth of the Chinese renminbi as a trade currency. But I also get, and in that they give the statistics for all of the transactions, relatively speaking, and all the currencies broken down by percentage. And in the last, one of the things that's been incredibly successful about QE and zero bound interest rates and all of this monetary experimental monetary policy has been the emergence or the strengthening of the dollar as the world's trade currency. Okay, because of the instability, and everybody is willing to work with the dollar because they don't have as much faith in everything else. But that's beginning to change as well. What would you do if you were president for 1 year? Oh my God. I'll answer some of that in just a minute. Are you long bit? You mean Bitcoin at the moment? Yeah, I have some Bitcoin. I have other cryptos as well. Yes, I am. I've been long Bitcoin at times for most of the last 10 years. When we're talking about what's realistic or not, can we take into consideration we spend $1 trillion a year paying contractors and blowing shit up? Could we at least direct that? That's exactly my point. When I was on Fault Lines this morning, I wanted to. I knew we were going to talk about Tulsi Gabbard, and for the next 5 or 6 minutes, I want to talk about her. Because, by the way, watching her speak now, I know that she's dangerous in a good way. But let's back up. So I wanted to, before we got into the Garland-Nixon Tulsi Gabbard love fest, I wanted to make sure that I brought up one of the things that I found disquieting about her. And I don't know why this is, and I'm not passing judgment on the woman. I'm just noting it as a fact, which is that she's childless. She's 37 and childless. She's on her second marriage, which is open to this is all on her Wikipedia page. This is nothing. Again, I'm not trying to throw shade on the woman because she's had a divorce. People make mistakes and they get into relationships that don't work for them. I happen to not be one of them, but I'm one of the lucky ones. I chose well, and she seems to think that she chose well. But I'm not arguing, right? I brought that up because I wanted to make the point that too many of the people that are running the world into the ground are childless and don't have any skin in the game of humanity. They are just kind of nihilistic ideologues. Merkel, Macron, Juncker, May, the rest of them, they're all childless. Terrible. So all the people who are running for the president, the Democratic side, they're all childless. And it's a bothersome thing that Gabbard is. I went over to her Wikipedia page. I wanted to see how many kids she had. I'm like, does she have any kids? Because if she did, she's almost perfect. Except for the gun thing. I could almost I can almost deal with Medicare for all at this point. If we brought all the troops home as a stopgap measure, if that's what it took to dismantle the overseas empire, I'm like, yeah, fine, I'll make that trade. Let's do that. But I really wanted her to be. I really wish that she was a mom because it changes your perspective. Moms are different people than women who are not moms. But that said, she's still very dangerous because she gets the problem at a fundamental level. She gets the problem that's two wings of the same bird of prey. So she can still have kids. And one of the things I think would be fucking awesome is if she does make waves within the Democratic primaries and she looks like she's going to be, able to start coming out of the pack, she should announce that she's pregnant and run for president pregnant. She'd win in a walk. It would be fucking crazy. I think she's mostly for real. She quit the DNC over what they did to Bernie. I listened to her speak, and she's using the right words. And you listen to her talk, and she's attacking the problem at the right way. She's attacking it on a moral ground. She's attacking it on a balance sheet perspective. She's attacking it at the right level. If she goes one step further, which I just tweeted out to her before I went live. If you go, this is beyond the money. It's about the eternal shame of Americans. We have to walk around with the stigma of what our fucking government does in our name. And there's no way to get rid of that shame. And no amount of apologies by individuals is enough. Even though the people that we're doing this to know it. Governments fight. People trade. I love the fact that Gabbard is running. I hope she's not controlled Oppo, Tom. I really do. I agree with you. No, I understand that Bush and Obama have children. It doesn't make them decent people. Hillary Clinton had a child, apparently. I agree. I'm not saying that that makes them automatically a better choice. But the probability of them being a decent person rises the minute they have children. If they're fucking dyed-in-the-wool ideologues and they're freaking corrupt as hell, well, no. Yes, the United States is a duopolitical corporatocracy. Absolutely. Except that I would go one step further and say it's a monoculture atop with two different brands on the same party. Two wings of the same bird of prey. It's the uniparty with two different brands. It's like Chevy and Oldsmobile. But underneath, they're both just shitty GMs. What I like about the why the mom thing is important to me is because, and this is the thing, imagine running on this. She's like, no, once I secured the nomination, I turned to my husband and said, I must get pregnant now because there's no way that I can lead a country if I'm not leading a family. She is married. That's the way I would, I mean, dude, if I was her political strategist, that's exactly what I would say. Because that would allay the fears of a lot of people. Because I related the story this morning. Now my cat wants in. Dude, there's plenty of room. Come on in, cat. She's divorced and remarried. The what's important now? What's important about that? I related the story this morning that when I ran for public office back in 2002, I did a thing, did a forum up in a debate with my Democratic opponent, the Republican who was the incumbent and was going to win. He didn't show up to anything. Over in Stark. Now, if you all know where Stark, Florida is, you'll know that Stark, Florida is about exactly what you expect. Okay? It's going to vote about 85-15 Republican. Okay? And I did really well at this thing. I spoke well. I got a lot of applause. I got people. There was, good 200-300 people in the audience. It wasn't a small event. It's carried on the local radio. We did about an hour back and forth. And I was green as shit. I mean, I barely knew what the hell I was talking about back then. But they knew I was sincere and they knew I was right. And I went afterwards and this afterwards. Now this was 2002, so I was what, 34? And afterwards, the only question I was asked by all these people, I was asked two questions over and over and over again. People shook my hand. They liked what I had to say. They were really happy that I was in the race. Yada, yada, yada. Great to see the libertarians coming out and giving us the propaganda. It's great to have you here. Where do you pray? Do you have any kids? Where do you pray? Do you have any kids? Do you think I got any votes that night? I'm not all on board the Gabbard train. Let's not kid ourselves here, okay? If it's between Gabbard and Trump in 2020, which is a very low order of probability, I'll probably stay home. I like Gabbard in the race to force Trump back on the MAGA path. I like her in the race to call out the hypocrisy and the disgusting moral bankruptcy of the Democrats. Okay? You want to see the cat? No. Cow's too fucking big to like get into the picture. Are you kidding? He's enormous. Am I religious? Spiritual, yes. Organized religion, no. I was raised Catholic. I'm not Catholic. You want to ask me if I have a... I understand that there's a motive force to the universe. I'm smart enough to realize that I don't know what the fuck it is, and therefore I act as if God exists. And that's the way I go about my life. I think the universe has a plan. I just don't know what the hell it is. And I'm good, and I'm okay with that. So what I do in this life matters because I'm a part of the universe. The deep state want Kamala Harris. Yeah, because they probably have so much dirt on her, it's not funny. Trump is holding fast to the Syria exit. We'll see. Tom's cat is not a cat. It's a lion playing cat. Oh, no. Cow's a cat, man. Trust me. Cow is all cat all the time. So. All right. We're at an hour and 2 minutes. I don't know that I really have much more in me. Rocket Man asked the question of what I would do my first year in office. Y'all know the standard answer to that. First thing I would do is bomb all the poppy fields in Afghanistan, declare all the CIA assets traitors, and have them gunned down by Russian Spetsnaz, or captured and hung over the Washington reflecting pool and fed to dogs. Because I'm unfortunately not enlightened. You don't want me as president. There's a reason why I don't do politics anymore. Oh, yeah, me versus AOC. I'd win in a walk. All right. The point being is that... Dude. Hold on. Cow. Make you famous, buddy. Oh! All right. See if we can do this. This is Cow. He hates being held. My buddy. Say hello, Cow. Hi, Cow. There you go. I have a cat named Tom Cow. Yeah, actually, my wife names her pets after various Thai food. So it's Tom Cow, but I just call him Cow. Am I on the ship to the moon or no? The moon is our harsh mistress, dude. No. I like the universe is a cold, dark, hostile, evil place, and I want nothing to do with the fucking moon. I half expected a bobcat. No, he's just your classic tabby, dude. He's just awesome. Working on the super chats thing. Actually, tried to get that done with Google this week. Ran into a problem with some of the other stuff that we're working on behind the scenes in order to I just have to work some other stuff out. So the truth is hopefully by next week we'll be good to go. So there you go. That's Cow. Yeah, I'm not even allowed to like walk around the house without him like stitched to me. He's very codependent. He's awesome, dude. He's like 18 pounds and he talks to me all day long. We have full conversations. I would be rich if I would just monetize Cow and just sit around and chat with him while Camille filmed this. Dude, I could do 5 minute. I have 5 minute conversations with the fucking cat. He's awesome. He's fantastic. So, well, that's just like your opinion, man. Yeah, the guy you should be thanking is Cow because he hates to be picked up. All right. All right, you guys take care. You have a great night. If you liked what you heard tonight, give a like and subscribe down below. That'd be fantastic. We're closing in on 2050. We're well past the year in subscribers. Gotta love it. Patreon /Gold Goats and Guns. If you're if you're so inclined. Yes, eventually I will enable super chats. We'll go on from there. And fuck it. You guys have a great night. Keep your stick on the ice.